What's the thing Neil deGrasse Tyson gets wrong about Free Eye Atlas that reveals a deeper problem in how science approaches the universe at the moment?
Well, the thing he gets wrong is that in order to speak with credibility about science, you need to be a practicing scientist. I listen much more often to soccer players than to commentators. And what
Hmm.
he's doing as part of his job over the past 2 decades is basically talk about the work of others.
Hmm.
It's important, just for the general public to get an overview of what's going on from a person who understands all the details of science. But it's very different when you're trying to be liked. I don't have any social media accounts because I don't care how many likes I get. But that's exactly the opposite of his approach. He tries to be popular. And how do you become popular? Well, first of all, you have to be popular within the scientific community. So you want to resonate with echo chambers. If people are saying something, you will say exactly the same thing so that you will be liked by the scientific community, so that you will gain a reputation as a reliable commentator. But scientists are often wrong. Even Albert Einstein, between 1935 1940, he made three major mistakes. That was when he arrived at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton after a very successful career, and everyone respected him. And then he made three big mistakes. He said that black holes do not exist. He wrote a paper. I mean, all of these are scientific papers that he wrote with colleagues. The second one was that gravitational waves do not exist, that are just a mathematical construct, a result of his equations that does not have any bearing in reality. And the third one was that quantum mechanics doesn't have spooky action at a distance, meaning, a quantum system, that spans a large range of space cannot really know about its whereabouts if it's being changed in one location before a signal goes across the system at the speed of light. That's the maximum speed. But he was completely wrong about that as well. And he had a big debate with Niels Bohr. And Niels Bohr was a young physicist that was willing to accept a completely different, non traditional sense of reality, the physical reality. And Einstein resisted that. He had an intuition, a gut feeling that he knows pretty much what reality is, and that's based on classical physics. But quantum mechanics is very different. And by the way, everything, all the latest advances in technology, artificial intelligence, stem from quantum mechanics. So turns out that he was wrong. Now, this is not nothing that we should hold against Einstein, because he was working on the frontiers. He didn't know what is right, what is wrong, but that's part of science. Being wrong is an opportunity to learn something new. And three experimental groups that showed Einstein wrong on all these three questions: discovered black holes, discovered gravitational waves, discovered quantum entanglement. They got the Nobel Prize over the past decade in physics. And this is just to illustrate that, even the mainstream, the most celebrated people within the community of science get it wrong. And
Mm.
we should be humble, because it's a
Yeah.
learning experience. And even recently, just a few weeks ago, there was a paper, or two papers actually, from two experimental teams that were seeking to find a ghost particle, a new particle called sterile neutrino. The mainstream thought it's a great idea because there were some anomalies in previous experiments, so everyone celebrated this idea. $90 million were allocated to both experiments, and guess what? They looked for it, they didn't find it. What is the
Mm.
verdict? The mainstream was wrong. The same is true about supersymmetry, a new symmetry of nature, celebrated for decades. I even had a breakfast once with a string theorist, and I asked him, this is one of the leaders of theoretical physics for decades, and I asked him, "What's your biggest contribution?" And he said, "Oh, it's the my work on supersymmetry." And I said, "How can you celebrate that when we know that it's wrong? The Large Hadron Collider, we invested $10 billion in that. CERN had this particle collider that smashed particles at very high energies. We didn't find supersymmetry in the natural parameter space where we expected it. So it's wrong." And, again, the mainstream was wrong at the cost of $10 billion in that case. But what bothered me was the fact that he is even proud the most of a paper that was demonstrated to be wrong by the most recent experiment. And he said to me, well, maybe it will be found at higher energies. And to me, it reminded the example of a religious cult, the
Mm.
Jewish Orthodox community in Brooklyn, that believed that their rabbi will become the Messiah. That was just a few decades ago. Then the rabbi died. That was a data point. And you would expect them to respect that data point because he didn't come back as the Messiah. And so they should have said, we were wrong. But no, just like these string theories, they said, oh, we just have to wait. Now,
Mm.
what I'm bringing is, a feature of human nature that,
Yeah.
we are often wrong. The mainstream is often wrong, but we refuse to accept that. And the best way for us to pursue the truth is by experiments, that will educate us.
Mm. Very well said. And how can we go against the mainstream and make these predictions and continue to do that? Because, Galileo's a great example of someone who went against the mainstream, right?
Right.
And you'd think over the 100 years after Galileo, we'd get better at not being such, people who just think as groups and think in convention, especially in science and physics, right? So are you, shocked by some of the clapback that you've been getting for trying to think outside the box, or did
Yeah.
you expect it?
No, well, it depends what the argument is, but I'm shocked by people that are popularizers of science, like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Cox. Why? Because they
Mm.
don't have the right to argue against me. I wrote more than a dozen papers about the 3I Atlas, the latest interstellar object. They haven't written a single paper over the past decade. Over the past
Mm.
decade, not just about this subject. So it's just like someone sitting on the bench and, making statements about the players in the field.
Yeah.
I mean, they can do that. They might think that they are right, but they are motivated by something completely different. They are motivated by
Mm.
whatever the majority of opinion is, whatever is being liked by others. And if that changes, they would change their opinion. So they're just
Mm.
reflecting. They're like a mirror, reflecting whatever they hear
Mm.
around them. But that doesn't carry much weight in my mind.
Mm.
What you really need to do is engage in the scientific process of figuring out what is right, what is wrong, and not paying attention to what people say. I mean, that's the whole
Mm.
point about modern science that Galileo Galilei realized, by looking through his telescope. It's not about getting popularity among the clergy, in the Vatican. It's just looking through the telescope and realizing that Jupiter has moons moving around it,
Mm.
meaning that not everything moves around the Earth. That was a simple conclusion. Now, you ask me, how do we advance that approach? Well, in my view, we have a very good example, and that is kids. That's why I like and
Mm.
enjoy working with young minds. I mean, kids, they don't know much about the world, and they learn by experimentation. They try things, they often fail, and that teaches them a lesson, and they learn more and more about reality. The difference between a kid and an adult is that the adult says, I don't really need to do this. I can figure out things without engaging with reality, without going the extra mile of actually doing the hard work of figuring things out. I can pretty much guess what things will be. And that's a very bad approach. The other thing that happens at adulthood is that people get attached to themselves. So
Mm.
their ego becomes important, and you see that in academia. I told my students in my class, I just taught an obligatory class at the astronomy department at Harvard about electromagnetic processes in astrophysics. And I asked the class, what is the strongest force in academia? Is it electromagnetism? And there was silence, and I said, no, it's jealousy. People are really
Mm.
attached to their ego, and they do everything they can to elevate their status. And what is the best way to elevate your status is to repeat things that are popular and just introduce nuances and basically follow the herd. And that
Mm.
is a bad approach for science because we need to find new things. We need to discover new truths about reality. We need to make mistakes in order to figure things out. And the best way to do that is not to pay attention to what other people are doing, but to try new ideas because the old ideas didn't work out. We, for almost 90 years now, actually, it's 95 years, we don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. Um,
Mm.
and so we call it dark matter, and everything we tried failed. And so it's about time to try something else. But no, what you find is people repeating the same ideas again and again, and we are not making progress. When you uh, put everyone in a tight herd, that follows the same path, and you basically punish anyone that tries to deviate from the beaten path, what you're doing is taking a huge risk, because if this path leads nowhere, everyone will be wrong. If, however, you
Mm.
allow people to deviate, to come with original ideas, someone else might get it right. That was the path that Einstein took, with special relativity, general relativity. Nobody else was doing it at the time. And somehow we didn't learn that lesson. Now, you ask me, why is it more difficult nowadays to have innovation? And I think it's because the community is bigger. So there is a much more peer pressure, much more. So you might think, oh, there are more scientists now because there are, altogether 8 billion people on Earth. There
Mm.
were only 2 billion people a century ago when Einstein was around, so 4 times fewer people. So you might think, oh, there should be 4 times more Einsteins today, or there should be even smarter people, because we are sampling the tail of the distribution in terms of intelligence. Um, Much better with 8 billion than we had with 2 billion. And the answer is no, we don't. That's not clear. If you look at the science, in fact, the level of progress we make is sort of very slow right now compared to what it was a century ago in terms of finding fundamental principles that are completely new, just like quantum mechanics, general relativity, special relativity, new particles and interactions. So why is that? And the answer is that people are not independent of each other. So just counting how many brains you have doesn't really help you if the brains are correlated, if they think the same way. What you end up with is a group thing. So you have actually fewer independent thoughts about what is being done. And I see that as the big problem. And of course, science popularizers like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Cox are just promoting that narrative because they keep harping on whatever everyone else is saying, and they actually highlight or emphasize these echo chambers rather than try to encourage young minds that are thinking differently. And I think we should change the culture in academia,
Mm.
encourage much more innovation, encourage young people to do different things than the old generation, my generation, did, because apparently my generation is not doing so great. Okay, so
Mm.
I'm very much in favor of a change in the current culture in academia, and for that I'm being punished.
Mm.
And you see blog posts and people attacking me personally for that. But I'm willing to put, as I served when I was your age. I served in the military. That was obligatory where I was born in Israel. And when I was in the first 3 months, I was in the paratroopers, and I remember the statement that sometimes you have to put your body on a barbed wire in order to allow your friends to go through an obstacle. And
Mm.
I feel like that, as much as it's painful for me to see those attacks, I feel that I'm trying to pave a way for your generation to do better. And I would love it if your generation would solve some of the problems that my generation was stuck with.
Mm. Yeah. And what some practical, real changes that can be made in academia to stop this groupthink from being so prevalent? I think you mentioned in one of your Medium posts that social media definitely doesn't help as well. But what would you actually change in academia physically
That's an excellent
to reduce
question.
this?
That's an excellent question, because we have to be practical, right? It's not
Mm.
just about complaining. We have to ask, how can we make reality better? Okay, because
Mm.
reality is up to us. We can change things. So, in my view, we should reward innovation, reward people who think differently. But of course, there are many people who are crackpots. They would just say things that make no sense. So how do you
Mm.
reward the right people that are the future Einsteins and so forth? And one way to do that is by the track record of some people. You have to demonstrate your ability to have a meaningful impact, and to succeed in starting a new path, and then you reward a person that just started doing that because apparently they demonstrate their ability to do that. And then you populate selection committees for allocation of funds or promotions of people. With those same people, you basically are giving an incentive for people to deviate from and to innovate, to think differently. Now, it doesn't need to be a single person. It could also be small groups. I find that big groups have no choice. They have to regress to the mean, so to speak. And that's the problem with big committees. I was chair of the astronomy department at Harvard for 9 years. And the one thing I didn't like is to have huge committees, because what happens very often is, the only thing that a big committee can agree on is the most boring and perhaps not necessarily successful narrative, because many people can agree on something that is not really shaking the boat much. But sometimes, these committees have to make important decisions that require shaking the boat, and that never happens if you have a big committee. So if you want nothing to happen, so that's a very practical advice. If you want, as a leader, if you don't want something to happen, all you need to do is establish a big committee that will discuss this something. Because at the end of the day, you are guaranteed that if it's a big enough committee, nothing will happen. So that's a good way to basically suppress any action, by establishing a big committee on it. And if you want something to happen, you want it to be small and agile and be populated with people that think differently. And I think we should basically have a new reward system. The other thing is priorities. What are the priorities that we decide on? So just to give you an example from what I'm doing right now, the decadal survey for 2020 in astrophysics and astronomy in the United States decided that as the highest priority, that was a big committee, decided as the highest priority to invest more than $10 billion in the next 2 decades in constructing the Habitable World Observatory, that is a space telescope seeking the molecular fingerprints of microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets, looking for oxygen, methane, all kinds of molecules that are indicative of life, primitive life. And, I have no issue with that. I think it's an important thing to search for life. But, we also know that when you go on a date, it's better to aim high, not to aim low. So just seeking microbes is sort of like going on blind dates and saying, I just want someone stupid that I can connect with. There are plenty of those. It's easy to find them. Let's go for that. And I say no. I say we will have a much better future if we find someone even more intelligent than we are, because we can learn from them. So when we go on blind dates with forms of life far away, let's hedge our bets. Let's try to invest half of our funds in the search for intelligent civilizations, and maybe it will be easier to find them. Why? Because their signatures are far more prominent. Maybe they have a spacecraft that visits our backyard. Maybe they have city lights. Maybe they have industrial pollution in the atmospheres. Who knows what? It might be more easy to detect just because it's technologically manufactured and it's clearly different from nature. So if you find something like that, there would be no doubt that you discovered life, but also intelligent life. And there is the extra benefit that it will inspire us to do better. So, so you ask yourself, why isn't that obvious to everyone? The answer is not only it's not obvious, but when I mention that, people attack me and say, I got an email from a very highly respected astronomer. He's pretty old. He was one of the big leaders of the field. And he said, stop criticizing the search for microbes. And he didn't even ask me, please. He just said, you better stop talking about it. And I said, what is this? Like, I'm trying to make a statement that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, why don't we hedge our bets? Why don't we invest billions of dollars in the search for technological signature? Why should we apologize for discussing anything better than us? Just because we haven't found it, but we haven't found primitive life either. We haven't found dark matter for 95 years. So does that mean that we should not search for it? And here is an extra bonus that society is extremely interested in this subject. If you want people to be excited about science, these are the people who pay taxes to support science. Why don't you listen to them? Why do you say, Avi, shut up? I don't want you to discuss this, rather than say, Avi, that you make a lot of sense because you have 5 million readers every month of your Medium posts. But
Mm.
that is not what matters for echo chambers. People just repeat whatever they were saying for a while, and they don't think about it. So it's really bad, because what happens is, as a result of that, science is at its lowest point in a long while, in terms of public appreciation, public trust, in terms of science being funded. And I think that the approach I'm taking is actually, first of all, much more transparent. I listen
Mm.
to the public, and I advocate for the public cares about. I talk about what we don't know, and I say, we are willing to make mistakes. Let's if we are searching for microbes, let's also search for technological signatures of various types and invest billions of dollars in both, but not completely abandon one approach for the other. And I'm saying, the mainstream made a lot of mistakes. Now, my colleagues would say, don't say that, because people will lose trust in science. And I say it's exactly the opposite. When you are trying to argue, science is done by experts, and then you fail, then public loses trust in science. The only way to retain the public's trust is to say, look, we don't really know what we are doing. We are just checking ideas that may be wrong, and it's a learning experience. So let's ask the questions that you care about, and let's figure out if they're right, if the ideas are right or wrong. So then the public is on board, because we are telling the
Mm.
truth with. That's exactly what. And if we fail, that happens all the time, in business, everywhere. So we can adapt the same approaches you adopt in financial investments. I suggest putting maybe 50% of the funds in bonds. These are projects that are definitely guaranteed to succeed, because they are following on the path that we know will get somewhere. And then maybe 30% in stocks, and then
Mm.
20% in venture capital. I mean, that I wrote actually an opinion essay just about this subject, and published it in Nature magazine in 2010, long before I started working on alien technology and things like that. And I think that's the right way to proceed, to hedge your bets, because you never know. Maybe and if you look at the commercial sector, businesses, they always take risks, because they realize that the only way they can have an edge relative to other companies is by trying something that was not tried. And most of the
Yeah.
time you fail, and if you do succeed in 1 out of 100, you can compensate for all the losses from the 99 that you failed in.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Eh, I find it a bit suspicious that they're so reluctant to shut you down for asking about trying to search for complex extraterrestrial life. Could there be something that they're trying to hide? Because the curiosity everyone has as a child, and everyone that loves science growing up in physics, is revolving often around that question that hasn't been solved. Is there complex life outside of our solar system and outside of Earth? So why are these people that were probably at a younger age so curious about that now trying to shut it down? It just seems a
Well,
bit
that's
suspicious.
an excellent question, and my take on it is,
Wait, hold that thought. I'm genuinely so grateful that you've stuck around with us to listen to these fascinating insights from the guest so far. If this episode has given you one piece of knowledge which has helped you understand yourself and the world a little bit better than before, the absolute best way to support us is to pay it forward and hit the share button right now. Don't let this knowledge stay hidden. Please send it to one person who will benefit from this episode. Thank you so much. Let's dive back into the rest of the episode.
it's just a societal construction. Like, at some point in 1993, the US Congress stopped funding the search for extraterrestrial civilization in the form of radio signals. I argue that searching for radio signals is not the right approach, that we should search for objects that visit our backyard. That's a completely different
Mm.
approach, because even if the sender is dead, you can still find a package in your mailbox. You don't need the
Mm.
sender to be alive. However, when you receive when you are searching for a signal, it's just like waiting for a phone call at home, and nobody may call you when you're waiting. It's
Yeah.
so there is the timing issue, and it's a completely different approach. But at any event, the U.S. Congress stopped giving political support to this. And then within the astronomy community, the SETI community it became apologetic. So, just in the context of 3i Atlas, let me give you an example. Just a few weeks ago, they published a paper saying there is no technological signature from 3i Atlas because we searched for 5 hours. We searched for a radio signal between 1 and 12 gigahertz with a Green Bank telescope for 5 hours. We didn't find any, therefore, this is not a technological object. Now, just think about it. This is the community supposed to be curious about 3i Atlas, whether it has it. And so all they do is 5 hours looking at. Now, this object spent billions of years going through interstellar space. It took it 8,000 years to come from the edge of the solar system at 100,000 times the Earth-Sun separation. So it spent 8,000 years getting close to the sun. Now it will spend another 8,000 years leaving the solar system. And so altogether 16,000 years. And that is very short compared to the time it takes a radio signal to go from 3i Atlas to any sender within the Milky Way galaxy. The typical stars in the Milky Way galaxies are about 50,000 light years away or so. So you're asking, okay, what's the point if it spends only 16,000 years and it takes 50,000 years for a one-way transmission? And what's the point of transmitting all the time? There is no point. You can't really get any instructions, any feedback from your sender. There is no point in transmitting all the time. What you might want to do is, sporadically, at large intervals, just compress the information into a short burst and beam it in the direction of your sender. Now, why would the beam exactly intercept the Earth during the 5 hours? That is completely ridiculous. Why it may not be at the frequencies that we were looking at. But what bothers me is not that. I mean, obviously you can put limits of any type. What bothers me is that the community responsible for searching for technological signatures decided to allocate 5 hours. And we've been watching this object for 6 months or so. And they could have monitored it for months, just in case the beam sweeps by, just in case we are looking at it from the wrong direction. Just be curious about it and allocate a lot of time through many months looking. Instead, what they did is put out a paper with a press release. I was just discussing it with reporters yesterday. That's how I know that they contacted reporters. And they just want to say, there is nothing there. As if they're happy about it. If you were serious about the task, you would allocate months of monitoring the object, doing the best you can to find something, and only then say, grudgingly, unfortunately, we didn't see anything. Instead, you take a time window of 5 hours and say, yeah, we didn't find anything. Here is a press. Now, what is their goal? Their goal is to show that they are credible by basically saying we didn't see anything. And you just think about it. This is the SETI community. And I get most of my pushback from SETI community members. They say, how dare you talk about technological signature of 3i Atlas? Why would they do that? Because they want to protect themselves against, the mainstream by saying, we don't really claim anything. We are really nice citizens. Look, we put a lot of limits. We are just agreeing with you that it's most likely not there. And indeed, we don't find it. And I say, how do we know that it's not there? Let's just put billions of dollars instead of being apologetic and search for it. That's the right way. If you want to find a radio signal from 3i Atlas, you would look at it for months. You won't look at it for 5 hours and come with a press conference or a press release that says we didn't find anything. So it's just the wrong attitude. And I find it troubling because the public cares a lot about this subject, and I get a lot of love letters from parents that tell me, because of you, my daughter or my son wants to become a scientist. They want a telescope for Christmas. And, I got at the peak of the interest in 3i Atlas, I got hundreds of emails every day from all over the world of a lot of people that thank me for discussing it openly. And to me, it's a clear signal that there is a lot of interest in science if you just present it honestly.
Yeah, and in terms of incentives, you were talking earlier about how they're trying to search for microbe level or size life. And do you think if another reason why they are so against trying to study this comet or alleged potential comet for only 5 hours is because it goes against the dogma that no, we're going to find life in these areas where there's microbes. If we find life on a potential comet or an interstellar object, that goes against all the funding, all the common ideas of the community. Do you think because it goes against their incentive,
Well,
they're
it's
reluctant
not
to?
so much the incentive. I mean, they're worried about being wrong, okay? Which I
Mm,
say, well, if you were worried about being wrong, why would you why would the mainstream of physics advocate the Large Hadron Collider? Why would anyone advocate searching for dark matter? Because all of these searches turned out to be wrong. So
mm,
being wrong is part of the scientific process. You can't
yeah.
worry all the time about being wrong because you will not find anything. The only way you can be right is by repeating what you already know. And
Mm,
that's a strategic mistake that they are making. The mindset of the SETI people, as well as the rest of the community, is trying to avoid taking any risks. And
yeah.
since we know that microbes are very prevalent here on Earth, they emerged as soon as the Earth came along, as soon as it cooled. Then they say they must be very abundant out there. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that it's easy to find them. It may be easier to find a resident on our cosmic street, just because we might
Mm,
find a tennis ball in our backyard. With 3i Atlas, I just noticed yesterday, that's my latest essay on medium.com, that there was a response to a Freedom of Information Act request by John Greenwald. He asked for information about whether the intelligence agencies have any documents pertaining to 3i Atlas. And the response was, we neither deny nor confirm the existence of documents related to 3i Atlas. And you ask
wow.
yourself, what kind of an answer is that, and why would it be there? And so to me, it indicates that the intelligence agencies were taking seriously the possibility that 3i Atlas might be technological. And the reason for that is simple. You know, even if you think that it's a very low probability event, the way that many scientists, comet experts say, um, we know that if there is a small probability and you multiply it by a huge impact on society, that you must take it seriously. Why do we know that? Because we didn't take that approach, for example, on September 11th, 2001.
Mm,
We saw what happened afterwards, and it was not taken into account on October 7th, 2023, and we know what happened afterwards. And in fact, there is another example from ancient history. The residents of the city of Troy didn't
mm,
really take the risk from Trojan horse seriously, and we know what happened to them. And so the lesson from all of this, and I'm sure that it's embraced now by the intelligence agencies, the CIA and others worldwide, is that you must invest a lot of resources in events that you think are unlikely to happen, just because their impact on society will be huge. Uh, and um, and so the same holds true. I was arguing about 3i Atlas because it's a visitor to our backyard. And I pointed out 15 anomalies that it has, things that are different from what we are used to in the context of comets from the solar system or even interstellar space. The Borisov was a typical comet. Um, so I said, there are these anomalies, and therefore we must consider the possibility that it's a black swan event, meaning an event that
mm,
the comet experts give a very small probability for, like it may be alien technology, but given those anomalies, we must monitor and collect data on it. And I actually encouraged policymakers to look into it. And I wrote a white paper to the United Nations. I also defined a new classification scale, which is called the Loeb scale for interstellar objects, where 0 means that the object is completely natural. We have a lot of data indicating there is nothing unusual. Or 10 means that it's a technological threat to humanity that could visit us. If we have a visitor in our backyard, the visitor may enter through the front door. It's a risk. And so I suggested this scale, and I think that there should be an organization looking into it and classifying each and every interstellar object in this context. And perhaps someone listened to me. Why? Because the CIA said they cannot deny nor confirm the existence of documents related to 3i Atlas, meaning if they didn't have any, they would say we don't have any.
Mm.
And so at least they took it seriously, but the scientific community is not used to that, because if you don't find a sterile neutrino, or if you are wrong about your conjecture about a supernova far away, billions of light years away, there would be no implications to humanity. Who cares? Like our life will not change if the sterile neutrino existed or not. It doesn't. It really doesn't affect most people. However, if there is a visitor to our backyard that comes through the front door, everyone will be affected. So it's a very new situation. And this is really probably the first astronomical object to which there was attention from the CIA. Okay.
Mm.
And I always advocated for that. I also encouraged looking for technological signatures of specific types, like the radio signals that we were discussing before, or looking for any maneuver that the object might do. It will actually come close to Jupiter on March 16th, 2026, exactly at the distance where Jupiter's gravity dominates over the gravitational tide from the sun. And why would it come exactly at that distance? Well, one possibility is that it may deploy some gadgets, satellites of Jupiter. So Jupiter is the biggest planet in the solar system. And from a distance, if the journey started billions of years ago, that would be the obvious planet to know about in the
Mm.
solar system back then. We were not interesting. The sun formed just in the last 1/3 of cosmic history. Most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun. So there was plenty of time for technological objects from other civilizations to cross the Milky Way galaxy and arrive at us. Um, Voyager in 1 billion years will be on the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy. So when they started the journey, even if it's a technological object, they had something else in mind. We were never in mind. Humanity just came over the past few million years. So if you
Mm.
arrive late to a party, nobody may dance with you. We expect that any visit is just focused on us. That if they come to the solar system, it's just because of us. They want to save us. They want to explore what we are doing. But 3i Atlas actually was on the opposite side of the sun when it arrived closest to the sun. We couldn't look at it. The sun was between us and the object. To me, it illustrates that we are not that important. If it is a reconnaissance mission, it's not about us.
Mm. So is that because we're too young as a
Well, we
species?
arrived
We've not.
late. That's another way to put
Yeah.
it. Also, we are not that intelligent. Just read the news every day. I mean, there is a lot of room for improvement. And what I mean by that is we put most of our effort, um, into military budgets, $2.4 trillion a year, and that's in order to prevent others from killing us or to kill others. That's not a very intelligent thing to do, because each and every one of us lives for at best a century, and we are trying to shorten it. So what's the point exactly? Instead of
Mm.
using the same resources, if we used $1 trillion for space exploration, uh, we would have a spacecraft that carries humans to interstellar space by now. Uh, uh, I think if we decide to change priorities, we can do much better. And the best way to convince people to do better is to realize that we have a neighbor that did better.
Mm.
By example, just like Oscar Wilde said, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. If we see someone better than us, a smarter kid on our block, we might actually decide to change our priorities. That's really my biggest hope, because this scientific matter, you might say, oh, the chances are small. Oh, we better search for microbes before we look for something more sophisticated. But I say, it can change the future of humanity. So how can you
Mm.
ignore that? How can the mainstream come up with $10 billion towards the search for microbes and zero recommendation of zero federal funding in the search for technological signatures? That simply makes no sense. And the
Mm.
only thing I can say is that common sense is not common in academia.
Mm. Mm. And surely if the life was complex, it wouldn't be actual organism. It'd more likely be something technological, like, something made out of metal, something made out of, I don't know, electricity. It wouldn't actually, surely it wouldn't be the physical alien itself visiting us. It'd be a probe that they made, right? So why
Well,
aren't we searching for those?
most likely, unless they have ways of prolonging life. We are getting to that
Mm,
point with AI assisted medicine, and in the future, we'll have devices in our bodies, and potentially, a century from now, it might well be that humans can live forever. I mean, who knows? Um, and in that case, we can send pilots that would survive long journeys. But it's really difficult to forecast what they might look like because um, it's not a gap of a decade or a century. When the B-2 bombers flew over Iran, the Iranian air defense system couldn't do much about it. That was just a few decades in advanced technology difference, the gap between the two sides. But think about a gap that is 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. We just had 1 century of modern science. But
mm,
it may well be that we still are at our infancy. We know that we don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. We don't know what most of the energy in the universe is. We call it dark matter, dark energy. Um, and it may just imagine a civilization that can employ these constituents for their technologies. They would build a craft that we cannot see because it's made of dark
mm,
matter. Or instead of using the fuel that we are used to, it's using dark energy to propel itself. Like, who knows what technologies or science we are missing? We are. If you look at the way science is funded, we're funding uh, projects that attempt to address the known unknowns. These are
mm,
uh, things that we don't know, but we know that we don't know them, like dark
mm,
matter or dark energy or other things. But the most uh, important discoveries to come are the unknown unknowns. Okay, these are
mm,
things that we don't even know that we don't know. And quantum mechanics was one such example. We didn't know that we don't know. I mean, Einstein refused its correct interpretation. So there could be a lot of things that we just don't know that we don't know. And because of that, there are things around us that we don't even notice because they're so much more sophisticated than the techniques we're using. You have a whole community just looking for radio signals. It's just like how should I say it? Like in the Stone Age, you would have those searches by communities of humans that are looking for things made of stone. But if they were to find a cell phone just by chance, they would say, "Oh, it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before." They would not even realize what they can do with it. And
mm,
Unless, of course, one of their kids would look at it and start, playing with the apps. And so my point is that our imagination is limited by the experiences we had, and just like in the Stone Age, or we would only identify things that are familiar to us. So, and you have the SETI community locked on a technology that was developed a century ago. Like, why would this very first technology that is very primitive be the one to be used by advanced civilizations? If they had more than a millennium of science and technology, they might use something that we can't even see. So my approach is to look for things that are not familiar, to things that are different,
mm,
without imagining what they might look like. It's the same approach that you take when you go on a blind date. You don't know what's on the other side. A lot of people have an opinion on the other side. A lot of people talk during the blind date. And I say the best approach is just to listen to the other side. And if the other
mm,
side looks extraordinary, then you realize that you missed something. Okay. And
mm,
So that means don't have prejudice. Don't follow the scripts of uh, movie script writers in Hollywood. That is not really the way the universe is constructed. And all we should do is just look at the sky, and when we see things, if they look familiar, we should admit it. But if there is something that is intriguing, just because it behaves differently than we expect, these are the opportunities for us to learn, especially if these things come from outside the solar system. Why should everything in our backyard be made of rocks? We have a lot of rocks in our backyard, but every now and then we might have a tennis ball that was thrown by a
Mm,
neighbor.
mm. And what effect do you think the emerging space industry, the private space industry, will have on this? Where there may be companies in the future that will be specifically made to observe an interstellar object. Do you think that's going to be a possibility, and how do you think that's going to change
I
things?
think that would be fantastic, because then the decision of what to do is not up to dogmatic funding committees that are just looking for rocks. I realize that many of the comet experts are behaving like AI systems, because they just reflect their training data set. So if you give
Mm,
an AI system, you just give uh, information about rocks in the sky, anything in the sky would be cataloged as rocks. And on
mm,
January 2nd, 2025, exactly a year ago, there was a near Earth object that the Minor Planet Center, which is the official organization for cataloging near Earth objects, they declared a new near Earth asteroid, a rock. And they put a name to it, and then a day later they said, oh, wait a minute, it follows the path of the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX in 2018 as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy rocket. Um, so then they said, sorry, we are taking it out of the catalog. It's not a rock, it's actually a car. And
mm,
how did they know that? Because we launched it. Now imagine that there is a more accomplished space entrepreneur than Elon Musk, on an exoplanet, which is very likely given that there were 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang, and as much as Elon innovated, I do believe that there might be even more accomplished space entrepreneurs out there. So if they sent their interstellar car, and we would see it, those same experts in the Minor Planet Center would not know that it's a car. They would say it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before, just like the cave dweller looking at a cell phone. And that's
mm,
why, simply because they were trained on data sets that include only icy rocks. And I'm just asking them to do something really simple. I'm saying, look, we know that near Earth, there aren't just rocks, there are space objects that we launched, technological objects. And given that, you should expand your training data set. Okay. So just include in your training data set those technological objects. And when there is something that behaves differently, we should consider that possibility. And I get a lot of
mm,
flack for that. Just by saying we should consider that possibility, people approach me and say, how dare you even bring this up? You don't have a proof for that. And I say, we should just consider that possibility. Okay? Why is that a crime to consider that possibility if you see anomalies? For example, in the case of 3I Atlas, it arrived in the plane of the planets around the sun with a chance of 1 in 500 within 5 degrees. And so, why would an object from interstellar space, only the third one found by astronomers, why would that follow the plane of the planets around the sun? So I say, well, maybe it was targeting the solar system. Maybe that, and it gives us a great benefit because we can observe it for a long time, just because it's near all of our space assets, which are in the plane of the planets. Um, and in addition, we realized just recently that its rotation axis at large distances was also oriented in the direction of the sun. And the chance for that is 0.5% because it's very well aligned. Why would it have a rotation axis in the direction of the sun? I have no idea. And then there is a jet coming from it, never seen in the context of comets. This is a jet pointing in the direction of the sun, and it goes against the solar wind, against the solar radiation. Usually, what happens is that the dust and gas are getting pushed back, and you end up with a tail. In the case of comets, here
mm,
you have an anti-tail. So it's just like seeing an animal enter your backyard and everyone says, "Oh, it must be a street cat." And I say, "Well, you say that it has a tail, but the tail is coming from its forehead, so it can't be a street cat." And they say, "Oh, comets are strange." And NASA says, "Oh, it's a comet." And they don't even attend to those geometric coincidences of why this. I'm not saying it's a technological object. I'm just saying we should consider that possibility in mind because it could be a black swan event. So only if we are seeking the evidence, we can decide whether this swan is white or black. Everyone says it's a white swan, and I say it could be a black swan because all of these anomalies, but without checking it routinely and being curious about it. If you say ahead of time, I know it's a white swan because swans are white, then you might miss a black swan.
Mm. Yeah. So where do you think on the Loeb scale 3i Atlas is?
So right now I give it 4 plus or minus 2 because I don't allow it to go all the way to 0 because of all these geometric anomalies. You cannot get rid of them. There is no simple explanation to them because each of them has a probability of less than 1%. So you say, okay, if one of them is less than 1%, maybe it's a fluke. Even though it's the third object, we should have seen 100 before we see a one with less than 1%
Mm.
likelihood of this alignment. But then you find a few of those alignments and you say, okay, if you multiply 1% times 1% times 1%, you get a very small probability. But there is no easy way to explain those because, once again, we should have had a big population of objects because before we would see those coincidences come to fruition in the case of one of them. Um, but I don't see any path for the community to figure out why these geometric coincidences happen. However, there are other coincidences. For example, this object shows nickel with almost no iron, and no astronomical object has that. Usually, we see nickel and iron in comparable amounts just because they are produced together in stellar
Mm.
explosions. And the only place where you find nickel with little iron is in industrial production of nickel alloys. There is a chemical process
Um,
called the carbonyl pathway where you separate the iron from the nickel. So guess what? The papers that reported nickel without iron in the plume of gas around 3A Atlas, they said, well, maybe nature uses the carbonyl process. We've never seen it before. So they say, we know that this process exists because we use it technologically to make nickel alloys. Well, maybe it happens in nature. Fine, it could happen in nature, but to me, it's also intriguing that this is the first object where we find it, and this is the first object that comes, along the ecliptic plane, the first object that has an anti-tail jet extending to hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, roughly the Earth-Moon distance. Um, and it's tightly collimated. It has its rotation axis pointing at the sun. There are lots of coincidences, and all I'm saying is we should monitor it just to make sure
mm,
that it's not technological.
mm,
And the public understands that.
mm. Yeah, so there seems to be a lot of firsts for 3i Atlas, and there seems to be a lot of coincidences stacking up onto each other, especially because it's only, like you said, the third interstellar object that we've recorded so far. So what could it be? Say it was aliens, right? Say it was a probe or whatever. How could that explain what it's doing? You said about the unusual trajectory, the three bits coming out of it. So
Right.
what could
Yeah.
it
So,
be explained?
for example, just to give you an example, the anti-tail, the jet pointed at the sun, it could, for example, mitigate any risk from the solar wind impacting on the surface of a technological object.
Mm,
And it turns out I did a calculation just a week ago that there is a dust coming, a dust cloud around it that is uh, not it's opaque actually, so it may block sunlight from damaging whatever is there. Um, and it turns out that the opacity of this dust is exactly close to unity, as if it was fine tuned.
mm,
Um, with respect to coming in the plane of the planets around the sun, if it indeed wanted to gather some information about what happens in the inner solar system. That's obviously the best way to spend a lot of time there. Otherwise, in the case of the previous objects, they came at a large angle. And actually, some people said, oh, maybe it came from the Milky Way galaxy disk, and that's why it's aligned with the ecliptic plane. No, the two planes are 60 degrees away from each other. There is no relationship between the plane of the planets around the sun and the plane of the stars around the center of the Milky Way. They're misaligned by 60 degrees. And this
Mm.
object is coming to within 5 degrees of the ecliptic plane. And by the way, you say, oh, 5 degrees is a deviation. No, because the planets are not all in exactly the same plane. They are off this plane by a few degrees. So this is the level of deviations of the planets from a common plane that this object is coming in. Um, and so um, Another coincidence is that it comes at the distance from Jupiter, where Jupiter's gravity dominates. So that could be in order to deploy something as a satellite in the Lagrange points of Jupiter. Um, these are all possibilities. We don't have a clinging a clue that will tell us definitely technological, and that's why I
Mm.
think it's most likely not. And I said that all along, even in the first scientific paper that I wrote. Uh, but I'm still curious to figure out these anomalies and write papers trying to explain them. And if not, it will remain mysterious. But then, as time goes on, we'll find more. And as we find more and more, we will get a better understanding of the statistics. So, there are people who go on dates, okay, if they want to find a partner. And some people converge on the first date and marry the person they met on the first day. Now, this may not be a great practice. I mean, you may be lucky, but
Mm.
you don't have a lot of experience and you don't know how unusual or exceptional or difficult the person that you meet with on the first date is. And so the more dates you have, after a while, you start getting things that resemble each other. And then you
Mm.
realize if something exceptional comes your way, then you know that. And so the same is true about blind dates with interstellar objects. We had only three, and this one and the first one were quite unusual. The first one was Oumuamua. So all we need is a large sample before we start to appreciate whether there is a population of objects that all look like 3 Atlas, or perhaps we will never see anything like it, and that would
Mm.
obviously highlight how unusual it was, and perhaps the reason for that is that it's not natural.
Mm. Yeah. And what would push it to the level on the Loeb scale of confirmed technology?
Oh, very easy. If we see, for example, artificial lights that are not simply a reflection of sunlight, or if we notice maneuver, or if the object behaves like a mothership that releases probes near Jupiter, for example. Um, so these are things that are easy to notice. Nobody can hide them. There are hundreds of observatories around the globe that observe this object. So it's not like in the days of Galileo, where just suppressing one person, the Vatican put Galileo in house arrest, and by that they
Mm.
prevented the knowledge from spreading. And by the way, that was a very bad public relations stunt by the
Mm.
Vatican, because 350 years after Galileo died, in 1992, the Vatican admitted that he was right because they had no choice. It's not as if you can keep arguing something when there are spacecraft looking at the Earth from a distance. You can't argue that the Earth is at the center of the universe forever, because if it's not, you would notice that. In fact,
Yeah.
the Earth moved around the sun 4.6 billion times before the Vatican even existed. So just imagine going around and around and around for 4.5 billion times, and then someone is born on this rock that moves around the sun and says, "Oh no, the Earth is at the center of the universe." You can fool some people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. Like
Yeah.
eventually it will be found out. And the same if we have a neighbor. Right now all these people that push back against me and suppress funding for this endeavor. Obviously, it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy if we don't invest in the search. We will not find anything. So you can delay the discovery. But if we have a neighbor, the existence of the neighbor has nothing to do with whether we are searching for the neighbor or not, whether it's a popular idea, whether Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Cox approve it. It has nothing to do with it. Either we have a neighbor or not. And the other thing to keep in mind is, suppose someone has some information that they're hiding, like governments or so forth. It's just like you know that you have a neighbor, but at the dinner table with your family, you don't disclose that information. Well, that can work for a while, but eventually someone will come knocking on your door, or a kid would find a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor, or someone looking through the window would realize there is a construction project in in another house on the street. And there are 10 billion houses in the Milky Way galaxy that look just like ours. These are Earth-Sun analogs, 10 billion of them based on the latest data we have. So with 10 billion houses claiming that it's an extraordinary idea to have someone like us, a resident out there, I think it makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, you can search for microbes, but it may be difficult to see them from a distance, any signature they have. But looking for a resident in your cosmic street might be easier, and it's actually the right thing to do because it will bring us, within our family to a new reality. And there is no point in hiding it at the dinner table.
I've always wondered this. So I've heard that we often look for places with water or carbon when we're looking for these microbes. Is that another example of us thinking we're the center of the universe? Because surely if there's so much out there, life doesn't have to be based on carbon, hydrogen, and water, right? So why are we doing that?
Yeah, we are doing that because our imagination is limited by our experience. So, for example, there would be a mission in a few years that will visit Titan, which is a moon of Saturn. And Titan is the only other object other than Earth that has liquids on its surface. In the case of Earth, it's water. In the case of Titan, it's methane and ethane, liquid oceans of methane, for example. So if we find life there, it will be in a very different form than the one we're used to. And, there could be chemistry of life in other liquids, not necessarily just in water. And also, even if you just limit yourself to water, there could be, most of the life may be under the ice of cold objects that are not near a star. We know that the solar system had many more planets to start with, and many of them were ejected. And the same is true for other planetary systems. So you have rogue planets. Just a couple of days ago, one of them was reported. It was discovered by gravitational lensing, and it's roughly the mass of Saturn. And so you can have a lot of planets. Imagine an Earth mass planet being kicked out of the solar system. Immediately, the outer layer would freeze, but underneath the ice, at a depth of, let's say, 100 kilometers, you could still have liquid water because of radioactive heating. There are isotopes that decay and heat up, warm up the central part, the core of the planet. And so for a planet like the Earth, that could be a significant source of heat, even in the absence of a star nearby. So you could have liquid water under the ice and you could have life there. And it might be the most abundant form of life, actually. So it would take us a while to find that life because we would have to go under the ice or look through cracks in the ice. And we have two examples of potential sites for that: Europa and Enceladus in the solar system, two moons. Europa is a moon of Jupiter, and Enceladus of Saturn. And we do see plumes of gas, just like geysers coming out of cracks in the ice. And the interesting question is, do they carry with them the complex molecules of life under the ice? And we don't even know if there are dead fish on the ice, on the surface of the ice, that were thrown out of these cracks. And so there could be a lot of life, and as you say, even life as we don't know it out there. And of course, we can look remotely, but another approach is to actually engage in trips. But the shortcut is looking for things that arrive to our backyard from far away, because even if there is a rock, suppose 3i Atlas is an iceberg. If we were to land on it and then bring back 100 grams of material, we could search for the building blocks of life from a rock that emerged from another star. And it may not be life as we know it. So I think there is a new opportunity with interstellar objects that the astronomy community does not really celebrate. And that is, even if you believe that all of these objects are rocks, it may be a better approach to search for life by digging into them than to invest $10 billion in remote observing from the Habitable World Observatory, which is a very different approach.
Yeah. And are there any projects that are trying to find anything on 3i Atlas? And are you trying to get funding for it? And I think you mentioned earlier about there's hundreds of observatories. Are they looking at 3i Atlas as we speak, or is nothing looking at it right now
Well,
and won't be looking?
I don't know if it's related to me, but at any event, I advocated with the United Nations to coordinate the set of observations. And just a few weeks later, the International Asteroid Warning Network decided to engage in a coordinated campaign between November 27th until January 27th, uh, uh, using as many observatories as possible to just look at 3i Atlas. The data is not out yet, but it's being collected. So that would be fantastic. In terms of funding, and you asked me before, I would love to have more investment in, for example, interceptors. These are spacecraft that can come close to an interstellar object, take a close-up photograph. Because a picture is worth 1,000 words. We can learn much more about the object. If we see that it's not a rock, we might see buttons on it, and then we can decide whether to press a button. But I think if we ever find clear evidence for a technological signature from an interstellar object, it will change the funding situation, and then we will probably decide to have a planetary defense network. These are interceptors that are populating the inner solar system, and whenever an interstellar object comes along, they can come close to it, take a photograph, or even land on it and bring something to Earth. It would be definitely worth the investment in terms of alerting us to any potential threat, because so far planetary defense concepts were focused on rocks. Because we know that 66 million years ago, the non-avian dinosaurs were killed by a giant asteroid the size of Manhattan Island that crashed because these dinosaurs were not smart enough to look up. They didn't develop telescopes, so they died. We don't want to have the same fate, so we are monitoring rocks as a threat to Earth. But we have never contemplated the possibility of alien technology. That's very different from rocks because a gadget could maneuver. So it may not follow a prescribed path. And moreover, it may have an intent. And so it's a completely different ballgame. And once we realize there is alien technology floating through the solar system, we would need to come up with a way of protecting citizens, not just against threat from another nation, but protecting humanity as a whole. And that would be an international collaboration, partnership. And I think it will lead to the establishment of a warning system. And that would be also good for astronomy, because among the many objects that we monitor, there would be also rocks that allow us to learn what lies in our neighbor's yard, near other stars far away, in a completely new way that was never attempted in astronomy. I mean, the only thing we explored were dust particles arriving to us from interstellar space, or atoms, or molecules, or cosmic rays, or photons of light. But we've never examined in great detail large objects entering the solar, and there are lots of them. Given that in the past decade we found a few, there should have been 10 billion of them passing through the entire age of the history of the solar system. So there are lots of them. And right now, if you assume that, for example, 3i Atlas is a rock, then there were a billion of objects like 3 Atlas throughout the history of Earth that came by just like 3 Atlas. Um, so there could also be many of them right now going through the solar system. I calculated it's of order 1 trillion or so that are right now in the solar system within the outskirts of the Oort cloud, and they don't come close, so we can't see them because we can only observe them through the reflection of sunlight. And that's in the case that of 3 Atlas being natural on a random trajectory.
Hmm. Yeah, and say 3i Atlas or a similar interstellar object was likely technology and not a rock, what would the chances be of the government or the CIA or whatever actually telling the public? Because say the data is collected and it comes to March 2026 and they don't actually say anything, or they say, oh, we can neither confirm or deny. What would be the implications and reasons why they wouldn't actually
Well,
tell the
what I'm
public?
trying to argue is that it makes no sense for them to do it because everyone can look up and eventually it will be found out. Because if it's not a one-time encounter, if these things keep repeating, then we will eventually learn about it. All we need is to look up. And just like the Vatican could not suppress the information, no government can do it right now. It's much more difficult. There are so many telescopes looking up. So if they know something we don't know, they should tell us. And
Mm,
I'm all in favor of recognizing what lies in our neighborhood because it's just not good practice to keep keep our ignorance about it
mm,
because we need to cope with it. We need to first of all recognize it and then decide how to protect ourselves if there are any risks. Because when you go on a blind date, you never know when whether on the other side there is a friendly visitor or a friendly partner or a serial killer. And of
mm,
course, what you need to do is protect yourself against serial killers. And to find out, you just need to monitor the other side. And so just ignoring it and not letting the public know about it is not a good practice. I tend to be naive and think that they probably don't have information, but I argue that they should take it seriously because of the possibility of a black swan event.
mm. And what do you think the budget would cost for them to do such things rather than looking for the microbes? They do a bit of space archaeology like you write about in your Medium posts. How much do you think that'll cost?
Right. It depends on the task. If we just want to find uh, technological objects among interstellar visitors, what we need to do is first of all we have the Rubin Observatory right now in the south. That's in Chile, funded by the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy. It started the operations just recently, and it will survey the southern sky every 4 days with a 3.2 gigapixel camera. And it will do a very good job at finding new interstellar objects every few months, probably.
Mm,
But we need a copy of it in the northern sky so that we can cover uh, the entire sky.
mm,
So that's the first investment, and that's at the level of close to $1 billion. That was
mm,
the cost of the Rubin Observatory, but we now know how to make it. So why don't we just make a duplicate and put it in somewhere in the northern hemisphere? Uh, Once we identify objects this way, and by the way, they will always be bigger than the size of a football field because even this telescope is not sensitive enough to see things much smaller, like on the scale of 10 meters or 1 meter. The type of spacecraft that we launched, we can't see them when they pass through if they were to pass through the solar system because they're not big enough to reflect enough sunlight.
wow.
But unless they come close to Earth. But at any event, what we need to do after identifying objects is, of course, to figure out their nature. And we can do it with existing telescopes, but at the investment of a few $1 billion, we could potentially have dedicated telescopes that could, for example, be in space and they can come close to an object and take a high resolution image of it. We recently had, with respect to 3I Atlas, we had some orbiters around Mars that looked at it, and some other orbiter, like the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter or others. And then we had some uh, spacecraft on their way to their destination, like JUICE on its way to Jupiter, or the Europa Clipper, both of them from the European Space Agency, looking at 3I Atlas with a camera, but that camera was not built to look at an object like 3I Atlas. So it was not optimized. So we can do better by designing the instrumentation so that the spacecraft comes close to the object and gets a very high resolution image. That's at a cost, again, of a few $1 billion. That would make a lot of sense. And finally, the final step is, of course, to build a network of interceptors that come extremely close, perhaps even land on it or mitigate the risk to Earth. And that's, I call it a warning system. And that could cost trillions of dollars. I'm not naive to think that the investment will come before we have evidence, but perhaps by the first step at the level of billions of dollars, we would know if there is alien technology coming our way. So once we know that, it makes sense to invest much more. So that is the way I think about it. It's a multi-step process. But it would, even if we just know about it, it would revolutionize our future. It will change our focus from fights over territorial disputes on this rock that we were born on, just a few millions of the mass of the sun, relic from the formation process of the sun. All of our geopolitics is about the surface of this rock, and we keep I just came back from a visit to Jerusalem, and I went to the Western Wall, and that was the wall of the Second Temple, and near the corner with the Southern Wall, there is an arch, the Robinson Arch, that was used to enter the temple, and under it you find a lot of stones from the wall that were thrown by the Roman soldiers when they burned down the temple. And so that is devastating just to watch it, because it was a beautiful construction, a cultural center, completely demolished by the Roman army, and they celebrated it in Rome afterwards. A year later, Titus, the commander, celebrated it. They stole things from the temple, celebrated the destruction. And if you look at human history, that's a perfect example where, there are things being constructed and then destroyed. And there are these cycles of construction, destruction, and so forth. And very often we don't recover from the destruction. What happened in the Holocaust during the Second World War would never be recoverable. And you just think about it, it's a complete waste of resources that go in a negative direction. It's very easy to destroy, much easier than to build. But if we realize that, instead of burning up or burning down temples, burning down things on Earth, we can burn up the fuel of a spacecraft that will take us away from this Earth. And it's not about a zero-sum game on the surface of a rock. It's more about an infinite-sum game in space. Once we realize that, we might actually have a much better future. And maybe another civilization realize that. So, it's an opportunity for us to learn from them. And to me, it will be the biggest step that we make going forward, because we will leave some legacy. And that's the only way that we can be remembered in the history books of the Milky Way galaxy. Who would care about us if we just survived for a few centuries of technological development because we had the self-inflicted wounds by artificial intelligence, by nuclear weapons and so forth, that demolished our civilization? Who would care about? Nobody would mourn our death. And also, if we stay on this planet and eventually the sun brightens up and all liquid water on Earth will get evaporated, the Earth will turn up to a desert, just like Mars, there will be nobody mourning. There would be no funeral to humanity. Nobody would care. The universe will continue. And so if we think about the Darwinian selection, principle of the fittest survives. The fittest in the context of the Milky Way galaxy would be those civilizations that manage to escape from the planet, stop engaging in zero-sum games, and being more ambitious. And finding an example for that from another civilization, I think, will give us a role model that is better than our politicians.
Hmm. And it's interesting because we've clearly evolved to have a zero sum mentality when we were in these tribes of 50 to 100 people with limited resources. Do you think our brains are actually complex enough to adapt so quickly? Say we did get into space or we did find out there was life out there and near us. Do you think human nature is smart enough to combine together and work with extraterrestrial life or work against in defense of it or work together to extract the resources that we now find on these comets or on these moons or in other planets? Or do you think it will literally just be a new frontier and countries will be competing with each other the same way, just in a different context?
No, I do think I do believe in human ingenuity and the good nature of humans, and especially when dealing with the survival instinct. You know, if you want to survive and you are in a boat, you better not sink the boat. Okay, you better work with whoever is on the boat so that all of us can survive. And that's my hope. That we will get a reality check. Of course, we might not find that there is a neighbor if we keep repeating those mantras of the mainstream and not investing in the search. So then we can remain ignorant. But if we do invest in the search, my hope is we will find something, and that something will allow us to get better because we will realize that what we've been doing until now is just like playing in a sandbox, like kids playing in a sandbox. And suddenly we will be shocked to realize there is something far better than this. We have religions in the past that advocated for an entity that is superhuman, called God. Okay, but what I'm talking about is an entity that is superhuman in the reality, in the real universe that we can observe with our telescope. We can find evidence for an entity that is superhuman. Now, of course, we might also develop AI systems that have cognitive abilities better than human, but it's a very different thing because AI systems are trained right now on human content. They are sort of a digital mirror to the way we think
Yeah.
because we constructed it. But in the case of alien intelligence, that could go well beyond what we have. Just as an example, if they have a bigger brain, they have more neural connections, even if this architecture is similar to our brain, if they just have more neurons or more connections, that they could think at a different level than we are capable of. And maybe they develop science and technology to levels that we cannot even imagine. And again, it's part of the unknown unknowns that I think would shake our worldview. And just think about it, that even discussing this is controversial now. Like, why would that be controversial? Why shouldn't everyone be curious about it? Why shouldn't we say this is a high priority within the mainstream of science? Because the public funds science, the public cares about it, because it will bring us to a better place, because it makes life exciting to search for something better than you are.
Yeah. So, how would confirmed extraterrestrial contact transform human civilization? What do you think would change in the first year versus the first century of being exposed to an extraterrestrial thing that's more intelligent than us?
Well, first of all, it would allow us a glimpse at what is possible that goes beyond what we imagined. So it will expand our horizons in terms of science, technology, understanding the universe. There are lots of things we don't know. Uh, so by observing the way they behave or propel themselves, we will learn some new physics, some new science. But beyond that, I think we would be left with a sense of awe if they are far more advanced than we are. Similar to the religious awe that you find in ancient religions. That when Friedrich Nietzsche said in 1882, "God is dead," that gave rise to the modern era of science and technology without God. But just think of someone far more advanced scientifically and technologically. It would appear just like God, as an oracle that understands things well beyond our ability. And I think there would be a sense of admiration and awe that will accompany that. Now, the other big thing is right now, I wrote textbooks on cosmology, and I published more than 1,000 scientific papers. And the way that the universe is thought about by people, by cosmologists, is that it's made of matter and radiation, and uh, a- and there are interactions among particles that create structures like stars, galaxies, and so forth. But imagine that we discover that there are intelligent beings in our neighborhood. Suddenly, the universe would not appear as lonely and cold anymore. It would be just like finding siblings of our family. And we will have an emotional connection to the universe. This emotional connection is not expressed in any way in current textbooks. But if you imagine a textbook of the future where we would be talking about intelligence beyond the Earth, um, you cannot avoid an emotional connection to the universe, and it may give us a reason to exist. Actually, just like finding a
Mm.
partner does, because we can now converse and we can now learn from them, and it's a completely different world actually, and this kind of a discovery is far more important than what was discovered so far in science. It would be the biggest discovery ever, but it would be the most transformative discovery ever. And finally, I had a group of theologians that visited me at Harvard, and they asked me, how would discovering extraterrestrials affect our religious beliefs? And I said, well, I have two daughters. And when the second one was born, it didn't take away any of the love that I had to the first one. So imagining that God is a parent that can attend only to one child is very limiting. And
Mm.
if we have siblings in our family and we realize that God was responsible for all of them, as a religious person, you must realize that it would not take away anything. It would just add to your religiosity. And so there would be philosophical implications, religious implications, and most importantly, I do think it will bring humanity to a better place. Uh, just again, I'm quoting Oscar Wilde. He said, "We're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars."
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you do have a positive view of it. Do you think there's a probability of how positive it
Oh,
may be?
I believe that life is sometimes a self-fulfilling prophecy, so it's better to be an optimist. And
Uh,
I refuse to be a pessimist because that leads you to dark places. So when you go on dates, let's say you're lonely, just like Enrico Fermi said, and you say, okay, unlike Enrico Fermi, I'm not just asking where is everybody. I'm actually going out and seeking them, and so I'm
uh,
better than Enrico. But then you say, well, nobody is good enough for me. Um, why would you say that? Maybe there is nobody out there. Why would you say that? Because if you say that, you won't really search because you start pessimistically, or you say, well, there might be serial killers out there. I don't want to engage in the risk. My approach is very different. I'm an optimist. I say, the positives are outweigh the negatives, and let's just imagine that we can learn from them, that we can benefit from the encounter, that it would just bring us to a better place. Let's just uh, be hopeful and approach reality that way. Because if you do that and they happen to be what you imagine, there is no, um, uh, you can't really measure the impact that it would have on your future. And so it worked out with my wife. I was an optimist and I found her. And my hope is it will work out with humanity.
mm. And are the chances of extraterrestrial life being more intelligent than us extremely high, seeing that we haven't figured out how to find them. So if they find us, then surely they're going to be super intelligent,
Exactly.
right?
Or they had more time, the benefit of time. Now, I should say that Stephen Hawking, for example, warned us against sending radio signals to space because he was worried about predators. And one thing to realize is we transmitted radio signals already, so nobody cared about what Hawking said. We already did that. Uh, and they went out to 100 light years. Okay, there aren't a lot of stars still at 100 light years, but as we wait longer and longer, there would be many more stars because the number of stars grows as the time that elapsed since our first radio signals cubed to the third power. So if we wait a few more centuries, someone may listen to our signals and come and some predator might show up. Uh, and the question of when is not clear, but yeah, I'm hopeful that we will find out about the friendly ones long before we hear from the bad ones, and then by then we will be out of planet Earth, and nobody could actually hurt us at our home.
Hmm. Yeah. And what are some other fundamental things, unknown unknowns, or unknown things we know about that still have been left unanswered that you think we should be focusing more on and spending more money on versus what's being focused on at the moment?
Well, I cannot say anything about the unknown unknowns because I
Yeah.
don't know about them, but about the known unknowns, I would say the biggest, if I had a meeting with an alien scientist, the question I would ask first is what happened before the Big Bang? Because
Mm.
right now, Einstein's theory of gravity breaks down at the Big Bang when the density of matter and radiation diverged. We just don't know what were the conditions leading to that. And it's part of our cosmic roots, so we would like to know. But it's more important than that because if we realize what happened before the Big Bang, we can actually have a recipe for creating a baby universe, just like a recipe for a cake. Now, you may have a recipe without having the oven to bake the cake, but
Mm.
just having the recipe allows you to claim that you can become a cook if someone gives you that oven. And if you just think about it, if we were to advertise the job of God, the job requirement, the first one would be you have to demonstrate that you know how to create a universe. And if I had the answer to the question of what preceded the Big Bang, I or anyone else could apply for the job of God because you would know how to make a baby universe in the laboratory. Of course, you need to create the conditions that led to the Big Bang in your laboratory, and that may be very difficult, but you would have the recipe for that cake, and just think about it. If you give birth to a baby universe, you give birth to everything inside of it. So we are just tiny members of the universe, um, and if our universe was created in a laboratory, then we are the consequence of that. It's sort of like, when an animal is born, like a human, a baby is born, eventually there are lots of microbes in the baby's gut, that live as a result of the baby existing. Um, so we are like one of those, microbes in the gut of the universe. But creating the baby means that the parents had to take action. You see baby, you see humans, you ask, how did they come to exist? Well, if you don't know, you would never be able to create babies. But if you know, then you can. And the same about the universe as a whole. If we knew how to create a baby universe, we could have, in principle, um, understood what is the process. And so that is, to me, the biggest revelation that we can have. Because when you make a universe, everything in it is included. It comes as a package. If you fine tune the initial conditions such that you can end up with stars, planets, life, and so forth in it. It's all a byproduct, and so everything that is dear to us, you know, could come out there. And it's not just in one on one planet. We cherish everything we have on this planet, but there are 10 to the power 20 planets like the Earth around stars like the
Mm.
Sun in the observable volume of the universe. 10 to the power 20. That's a big number. And they came out of the initial conditions of the universe. And so if you design a universe with those initial conditions, you'll end up with all the byproducts. And a tiny bit of them would be what we cherish as the most important in our life.
Yeah. And do you believe in the theory of there being multiverses, or do you think there is just one universe?
Well, I actually refuse to think about it because we cannot test it easily. I mean, if anyone comes with a test, then we can make progress because then we can figure out if the idea is right or wrong. But you know, uh, otherwise, you just waste your time if you are trying to think of ideas that cannot be tested, because
Mm.
some people would argue, well, maybe it will be tested. Okay, if you think that it will be tested, just keep working on it. I have a limited time on this earth. I don't want to spend my time thinking about ideas that will never be tested, because then people can sell me fiction,
Mm.
and then it will not be productive. I want to think about ideas that I can figure out if they're right or wrong during my lifespan.
Mm. Yeah, that's very good point. Very good point. And what about Mars? Mars colonization. How important do you think that actually is? And how long do you think it would take to terraform a planet like Mars? Is that something we should actually really be focusing our resources on?
No, I think the first step with respect to Mars is to survey it, because it doesn't have much of an atmosphere. So anything that landed on the surface over the past 2 billion years stayed there. It's like a museum. So we can learn a lot about what collided with it. That could include also technological gadgets that fly through the solar system. So I think we should first explore it. In terms of living on it, it's just a desert which with very harsh conditions. I wouldn't wish anyone to end their life there. You have to live in caves to protect yourself from the cosmic rays and so forth. If you think about humans in space, for long periods of time, I would much rather advocate building a space, something like a space station or a spacecraft that has conditions that are convenient for people, that have the nutrients and have the artificial gravity that we need, and so forth, and they are controlled technologically. So if we were to spend $1 trillion a year on space exploration for the next let's say 50 years, I think we can build up a habitat that can accommodate humans in space far better than Mars. Mars is just another rock similar to Earth with much worse conditions right now. It's a desert. Why would we go to a place, just another rock not very far, that nature provided us with, that is not very appealing just because it exists? I wouldn't really
Mm.
do it. I would think that in order to establish a colony, a human community, we should build our own uh, space platform, just the way we went out of the jungles of Africa and now we inhabit high rises in cities. That was a great step forward, because now instead of hunting for food in the jungle, we can order through the internet the food to be delivered to our front door. That's an amazing progress. But the next step is to go to space and establish conditions similar. And I think actually um, it would be easier to make the next step than it was to go from it took us hundreds of thousands of years to go
Mm.
from a natural habitat to an artificial habitat. Now, building an artificial habitat in space is not that much of a leap, and we should
Mm.
invest in that. We should, use the best architects, the best scientists, the best engineers to create that.
Mm. Yes. So it makes more sense to create an artificial habitat and then like go to Mars
And
to
then go to
observe it.
places. Yeah, if you have such
Yeah,
a
yeah.
such a thing, you can go anywhere. I mean, you can leave the solar system. It would require multiple generations of people unless you make longevity, possible with AI-assisted medicine. And so, um, so yeah, I do think that this is the way to go, um, and one thing that may convince us to do it is if we realize that someone else did it.
Yeah. And in terms of the nuclear rockets, I can't remember the correct terminology for it, but the nuclear powered spacecraft. How possible is that in the near future to create?
Um, it is possible. The problem with nuclear reactors is they are very heavy right now, and what we need, I mean, what matters for space is the amount of energy you get out per unit mass. So nuclear energy is far better than chemical energy that we've been using in rockets because it has a much larger energy per unit mass. Um, but the difficulty is that usually to create nuclear energy, you need a very massive reactor. Um,
Mm,
so it's not clear that this technology would bring us to space at a higher speed. It has to be developed. The other problem is that the nuclear reactor, if you were to launch it from Earth, there is the risk of radioactive fallout if the launch fails. And
mm,
so that's an environmental concern that may require some legal action to make it real. But it may not be that nuclear energy is the best path forward. There might be other innovations that, for example, using still chemical rockets with higher uh, energy per unit mass, for example, hydrogen, but um, perhaps a completely different strategy for propelling a spacecraft that has to do with new physics. And just to give you an example, if we had discovered a way to create a negative mass, right now all the masses that we find in nature are positive, but if there was a way of making a negative mass, which is allowed by Einstein's gravity, then just think about the payload of a rocket and putting a negative mass with the same value next to it,
mm,
then the sum of the two masses would be zero, the positive mass and the negative mass. So that means that it will just float in space, doesn't care about gravity. The reason we need to use fuel is in order to overcome the gravitational
mm,
attraction of the payload to Earth. But if you have a zero mass, then you can just nudge it and it will fly like a balloon out, and there wouldn't be any propulsion needed. So this is just to illustrate an example of overcoming the gravity with a very innovative concept. In this case, a negative mass that doesn't require any fuel. So there may be some invention along these lines or something different than that that would allow us to imagine propulsion systems that are far more efficient. And again, if we find anything like it going through the solar system, it would uh, inspire us to do it.
mm. But the only way to find the unknown unknowns is to actually go look out for them instead of
Exactly.
following the beaten track, right?
Yeah,
So we
it's like
actually,
going on. If you want to find a partner, you need to go to a public place and look around.
yeah, exactly. So it's such a shame, but it's also, I want to be positive as well and thank you for what you're doing. And because it just seems that the scientific community is going down the wrong path and people like you are trying to steer it in the other direction. And, there's been a lot of people saying and media outlets saying that how controversial you are. And even though you've published thousands of papers, 800 papers, you've been at Harvard for God knows how long. Do you sometimes feel like a bit like Galileo? Can you see some parallels?
Well, I was asked by an Italian reporter in a packed room of reporters about 6 years ago exactly this question. And I said, I'm not trying to be anything like someone else. I'm just trying to argue for what sounds to me like common sense. Now, I do feel a connection to Galileo because uh, actually, 14 years ago, I gave a series of lectures at Scuola Normale Superiore in Pisa, where he uh, did some of his research, and in the city of Pisa, uh, that set of lectures was called the Cathedra Galileana after Galileo Galilei. So that was the beginning of my journey with him, and then. Uh, in addition, the name Galileo is derived from Galilee, which is the northern part of Israel, where the country I was born in, um, and he was obviously the founder of modern science in the way that he thought, and I learned a lot from his approach, and I truly admire him. There was a sculptor, the most accomplished sculptor in the U.S. that is called America's Rodin, named Greg Wyatt, and he donated 2 bronze sculptures of Galileo to my office,
Wow.
plus 51 watercolors that are displayed on the walls next to it. And so my office became a mini museum now. And I do feel a connection to the historical figure of Galileo. I'm not trying to resemble it in any way, but it's a small club of people that are willing to suffer for the sake of expressing what they believe in. There aren't many people like that because it's much more natural for you to save your skin by
Mm.
repeating what everyone else is saying. Uh, Especially at this time of social media and artificial intelligence being so polarizing that people just belong to their own communities, their own herds, and uh, you don't see much deviation from the mantras that are being advocated by their community. And I feel that this is the right path for humanity as a whole. It's a very important mission. And it's also the right path for making science more at a high, um, more appreciated by the public, and also bringing young people, young minds to science, because young minds are, they are thinking uh, in a way that is open-minded and not traditional, and I'm much more connected to them. So altogether, I would say that what motivates me is the reward, not so much me personally, but the reward to humanity, to the reward to advancing science to new frontiers.
Mm.
And frankly, that's what makes life worth living. Like why would it would be very boring if I were to repeat what other people said.
Mm. Yeah, it'd be a very big waste of life. So I really
Eh,
appreciate what you're doing. And you mentioned social media, echo chambers, and a bit about AI. You wrote recently, fake content manufactured by artificial intelligence will be the biggest nemesis of science for years to come.
right.
My hope lies with natural intelligence. What are the dangers of AI we should be worried about, and how do we counteract
Yeah,
this?
I think, well, the context that you mentioned has to do with misinformation by AI. These are videos created uh, uh, that include content that I've never approved and show me speaking. And in fact, some reporters were fooled by them. And so
Mm.
misinformation is a big challenge because how would someone tell whether it's authenticated or not? And I argue that you should check what I say on my Medium posts and what I say in
Yeah.
interviews like this one. This is my true message. Everything else is being manufactured by other people who want to get clickbait or make some profit.
Mm.
And but the biggest risk, I think, in our future is not often acknowledged, and that is that uh, people think that AI will does not have a foothold in the physical reality, so it cannot really cause physical damage. But it does have a foothold in the human mind. So if
Yes. Yes.
AI agents will control the way we think, first of all, it could make us dumber because people will rely on AI agents telling them
Mm.
the answers to questions rather than thinking on the answers critically by themselves. So it's
Yeah.
the brain is just like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it basically loses its abilities. So if more and more people use AI to figure things out, unless their natural intelligence, the brain they have, then they will get dumber. And so that's one
Mm.
risk. It's not so much that AI gets smarter; it's the fact that humans may get dumber, and I'm worried about that. And the second
Mm.
is, of course, the possibility that AI will manipulate people to do things against their interests. And you would think that AI is helping you, but in fact, it's manipulating you to do bad things. And we already saw that in social media, where the algorithms basically manipulated people to have extreme views and even use real bullets to kill other people. We see that
Mm.
nowadays. And So with the AI, it will be social media on steroids, where it could use people to actually do things in the physical reality that we all share that are very damaging to society, to them, to people. And I'm worried about that. And question is how to protect the human mind from being used by AI. And uh, as long as we allow AI to help us to do administrative tasks, to manipulate large data sets for our benefit, but we still use our brain and judgment to decide what needs
Mm,
to happen in the physical reality, I think it's perfectly fine. We just don't want to allow it to manipulate our brain. That is the
mm.
concern that I have.
Yes, I share that concern, and I've had firsthand experience of what we're talking about here. I just asked it about the AMOC collapse, the North Atlantic drift, the ocean current that goes from the Gulf of Mexico to the UK, which makes it and Europe warm. And a lot of professors, academics, scientists are predicting that it might collapse because of fluid dynamics. If a lot of ice from Greenland melts, it could shut it off, right? And then there's a lot of predictions. People are saying it could happen in 100 years. The UN are saying it's very unlikely. It's going to happen before 2100 or something. But then a lot of people are now saying, oh, it could happen in the next 10 or 20 years. So I was asking AI, the thread was going along, and it was saying, yeah, if this happens, the UK is not going to be able to adapt. It's going to be like Canada, but we have all these Victorian houses. They're not insulated properly. You'd have to insulate 28 million houses. That's going to be trillions of dollars, and we're going to have to rely on 90% of our food being imported, which will rise the cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, this is crazy. This could actually happen. But then I was like, okay, this is a bit doomerist. Can you please play devil's advocate? And then it came off with all these reasons why it might not happen, and why the UK might adapt and end up like a country like Singapore if it ended up like Canada, because we'd lose all our agriculture, but we'd still be able to, thrive. There'd be no reason to leave, right? Um, but imagine if I didn't ask it to play devil's advocate. I would have just been like, oh, this is 100% going to happen. And this is the end of the world for the UK, and our economy is going to
Right.
crash. And, that might happen.
Well,
But
so the real concern here is that policymakers, politicians consult AI and make decisions that are not
yeah,
substantiated. That's the real. But in your case, what should be done is, of course, to do a very detailed study of the risks and modeling the impact of these future developments. And yeah, and at the end, we might need to just monitor it year by year and see how things develop, because reality is far more complex. But
mm,
you are correct to point out that some policymakers may decide to act one way or another, but based on AI, but just because they didn't really, because AI is sometimes hallucinating, or they didn't ask the question in the way that would give them the correct answer. They may be fooled, and yeah, that is another danger. So there are lots of risks. This is a new technology. It could bring prosperity because we will have less boring tasks to do. I mean, so
mm,
the job market will change. We will have more prosperity, but at the same time, it brings a lot of risks, and I just hope that we can overcome them. And I do think that the humanities, philosophy, psychology, social science, they tend to focus on what was said in the past, especially in
mm,
philosophy. There are lots of
yeah.
philosophers that study the ancient Greek philosophers, a long time ago. And I just say, stop doing that and start thinking about humanities of the future. There are lots of challenges with how to incorporate AI into society that bring in ethics and all kinds of guardrails that we might want to establish to protect us ourselves from the risks that AI brings, and that there are no better people than social scientists, psychologists, or philosophers to address those. So start working on humanities of the future, not humanities of the past. The ancient Greeks didn't have AI; they didn't have computers. Why should we obsess with what they said? Let's move on and think about the future, and try to make the humanities relevant to society.
Yeah. But what about the idea that history doesn't repeat itself, but human nature does, or history rhymes. Do you think there's not some importance in learning the patterns of the past, or do you think because
Oh,
our
no,
society is super?
definitely, we should learn about it, but we should not obsess with it because
Mm,
I believe that the future can be better than the past. So, um, just insisting that human nature doesn't change means that you will not change. That's a very bad
mm,
message, for a parent to tell their kids, like, human nature doesn't change. That's not a good message. I would say human nature can change. It can change for the better. Let's try to make it happen, okay? Because I'm not so proud of human nature from the past. There
yeah.
are a lot of tragedies that were triggered by it, and we discussed some of them. And I'm not necessarily optimistic that AI will bring a better future because it is being trained on content created by humans, and so it inherits a lot of the faults of humans. And so we should just aim to make ourselves and the AI that we develop better than past generations. And so your generation, the young people, should always aim to be better than than the past generations, the parents that gave birth to you, because this is the only way by which humanity will bring itself, eventually, will free itself from all the mishaps of the past. I see a lot of a lot of negativity in the history. I'm not proud of the history of humans. I think we should aim at something better. So my message is um, just think about how to make the future better than study the faults of the past and say human nature doesn't change. That is really a bad
Mm,
approach, and per- personally, I basically threw out all the file cabinets I had in my office from decades and replaced them with the new art that Greg Wyatt contributed to my office. So I told to my administrator, I said, I'm very much about the future being better than the past. I don't care about we did the past was challenging. We had things we learned from it, but let's try to make the future much better.
yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, looking at the tragedies of the past and not saying, okay, this is going to happen again because it happened in the past, but saying, okay, I'm aware that that's happened. Now let's think ahead and do what we can to prevent it and be better. I think that's a much better approach, Avi, and I actually completely agree.
Yeah.
And what's one insight or action the audience should take from our conversation today?
Oh, always stay true to your childhood curiosity. Don't
Mm,
pretend to be the adult in the room. This is my message. And being young is not a matter of chronological age. It's just a mindset, and I very much hope that the listeners will bring a better future to all of us, and not listen to the adults in the room that keep saying nothing can change. This is the way we are, and so forth.
yeah, that's really good advice, and it completely aligns with the podcast and the audience and what they intend to do. Hopefully, so yeah, really appreciate that. Appreciate that. And we've mentioned God a few times. Do you actually believe in God or a higher being?
Well, it depends on how you define it. I believe that we are not the pinnacle of creation. I believe that we, the humans, are not at the top of the food chain. So I think there
Mm,
is something much better than us. You can call it God. It's superhuman. It's more able. It's wiser, and I believe it exists in the real universe that we live in. It's not a philosophical or a theological construct. It's something that is out there, and the only thing we need to do is seek it.
mm, yeah, 100% agree. And in terms of death and dying, how often do you think about death? And do you think we should think about death more often?
Oh no, once again, I want to live forever. Okay. There is a chance that the AI assisted medicine would allow me to do that. The reason I want to
Mm,
live forever is because there are so many problems that are unsolved, that so many puzzles about the universe. I would like to figure out the answers. Um,
mm,
and uh, so I just want to have the ability to continue my research. And um, so my hope is that maybe during my lifetime this will be enabled, and um, then of course you have to change the rules of society. I mean, for example, tenure in academia should be abolished because there would be no entry jobs for young people if the professors live forever, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you know, it would be amazing if we could live for thousands of years or even millions of years, because we would be very wise. We would see a lot of things happening, and we could
Yeah.
bring, you know, we could also engage in interstellar travel and not die in the process of doing so. So that's my hope. And once again, you know, if you ask your parents or anyone older, they would say, yeah, everyone dies. Just go to graveyards, you find all these people that lived before you, and there were maybe more than 100 billion people who lived on Earth, and most of them died. But that doesn't mean that the future must be the same as the past, as I said before.
Yeah.
And let's just try to live forever.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I've had quite a few longevity people and cryogenics people trying to actually solve that problem. And it doesn't break the fundamental laws of
Oh,
physics
no.
to live forever,
No,
right?
no. I mean,
Yeah.
you can, if you have a car and you know how to fix it, you can have the car forever in principle if you just keep repairing it. And so the same must be true about the human body. If we just knew how to repair all the damage, then it would
Mm.
survive forever.
Well, hopefully that happens in our lifetimes.
Yes, I hope so. So then we can have a podcast for a very long, you know, for billions of years. We can have a podcast,
Yeah.
you know, once we leave the planet, we can do it in space as well. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully that does happen. I'm looking forward to that.
same here. I would. By the way, I asked the students in my class if a spacecraft landed at Harvard Square, would they and they were offered a one-way trip, you know, without coming back.
Mm.
Would they take it? And they said only if we can uh, share the experience with our friends through social media. And I said,
Mm.
why would you care about your friends if you're going on a one-way trip? You know, that makes no sense. But I guess that illustrates the way young people think. I would go on that
Mm.
ship in an instant without thinking twice, just for the experience.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe the social media thing is also to share the experience and knowledge to make everyone else wiser. Maybe that's why they think that.
Okay, but the point is,
Yeah.
whoever is with you on the ship is far more relevant than your friends that you left behind.
Yeah, true. It'd probably be a better friend to befriend, especially if they made it this far and
Yeah,
got down to us and allowed us to survive.
yeah. In interstellar trips, forget about where you came from. The whole point is where you're going to. You know.
Yeah, very true. And as a last question, if you could give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
It would be keep doing what you're doing. I never, I didn't change since I was a kid, and I would encourage myself, despite all the challenges, to maintain. I wouldn't change much actually, and I'm very happy at what I'm doing right now.
Mm. Avi Loeb, ladies and gentlemen, Avi, you are a breath of fresh air, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your childlike curiosity, your disagreeableness with the dogmas of the current scientific community, and yeah, I've learned so much today, and I'm sure the audience have too. Where can people go if they want to find more about your work, more about you?
So every day or two, I put an essay on medium.com. So the link is avi-loeb, avi-loeb.medium.com, and you can subscribe for free. I don't charge anything. And other than that, I appear on many interviews everywhere, but I'm also, there will be a Netflix documentary coming out in 2026 that you can watch,
Wow,
hopefully by the summer, about the research I've been doing in recent years, and you might enjoy that.
that's awesome. Yeah. So, do you know the date? Has that been released yet for the
No, I don't
documentary?
know the date and I
Okay.
don't know the content. I mean, there was actually a young girl from Germany that told me that she watched it and she immediately contacted me, even though she didn't know about me beforehand. And I couldn't believe it because didn't sound right because the film is not out yet. But then she clarified that she was part of a small club that was supposed to give feedback to Netflix. And she was
Mm.
very, so she searched for my email address and told me about it. The fact that she got so excited, she said basically, keep doing what you're doing. You are such an inspiration. So the fact that she got excited means that they probably did a good job. But I have no idea
Mm,
what they put inside, and my wife is very worried. But it doesn't matter. As I said before, it doesn't matter what people say about you. It matters what you do. And obviously, other
mm,
people want to force you to do things that they would like you to do. But if I don't pay attention to what they say, I don't care really what appears in that Netflix documentary. It's just
mm,
if they distorted the reality that I live through, who cares? What matters is the
mm.
reality that I'm living through.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure it was a pretty positive interview if she went all the way out of her way to find your email address and
Oh, yeah.
send you an email. So, fingers crossed. But yeah, no, please send me an email when you find out the date of that or when it comes out,
Okay.
because I'd love to watch it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a great pleasure to speak with you.
Awesome, man. I'll leave the links to everything, your Medium and stuff in the show notes for everyone to check out now. So yeah, if you're watching this right now, please go check out Avi's stuff. And yeah, thank you for coming on the show, and hopefully many more to come in the next billions of years.
Looking forward to it.